Definitely.
Okay, so I don't know what session this is for me. Is there a number?
Stream 2.
Stream 2. Okay, so we started with this. This is the first question. Ignore the... We started with this question. What is the boundary of the university? This is on the basis of Bill's provocation, which was to do with if the boundary doesn't exist, if we have a completely open or completely porous university, then does it stop being a university? What's the definition of that? So we explored this using a kind of almost semi-design method, if you like. So what's the question that's behind that? What's the definition, if you like, of open and porous around which we might set a boundary? And that then led to the question, well, why are we even asking this? What's the value, if you like, behind us even... What's the motivation of wanting to be open or porous? So this started the real debate, the real discussion. You can see here a whole bunch of, not just stated values, but also contested values. A lot of people didn't necessarily agree with all of these. There was a lot of space around sort of discussion of these. So, for example, social mobility would be a classic example of this. Not everybody agreed that the university was responsible for social mobility.
No, we don't want social mobility. I think the argument was we do not want social mobility. We want social justice. Social mobility
that came later.
Okay, I'll show.
No, crack on, absolutely. I think it's important to raise it now because this is the kind of circular nature of what we're trying to do.
Okay.
I think the dream is that you don't need to achieve, or that you don't need to enact in that space, is that there shouldn't be that question in the first instance. So that's slightly idealistic in some ways, but that then kind of led to, there was a bit of a brief foray into this notion, the university as an object, the university as a cell. So again, it's kind of hinting at the notion that we're actually starting with a thing and we're trying to improve this thing. Again, as soon as you have a thing, you have a boundary, you have a definition of that. I don't know that kind of went particularly far in terms of the conversation.
Well, only that we were thinking about the university as a cell, and the cell form inside capitalism being the commodity, and therefore the university is a commodity that was enclosed and closed off in some ways, other than to provide a stream of value beyond it.
Which takes us perfectly back to this. Sorry, go for it.
But also regarding the cell, the idea of the cell is something that might be open to the outside, but also have an internal concentration of certain elements. That's the fact that it's semi-enclosed makes possible that those elements thrive in there.
Going back to that...
I'm not a biologist.
Well, I think that's the interest. If you wanted to push this metaphor a little bit further, then what we're starting to develop when we go back to this was that it was a range of values. So the motivation for wanting to be open, which then led to that question, this turned out to be this massive, massive spectrum of values. So I think the examples you gave, that's a spectrum, yeah. And you can pick what point of the spectrum you wish to be on in this. That it could be a monetising thing, that it could be a market thing.
What's the axis?
No axes, none whatsoever. There was a notion that it could be commons, and we could write this list and we could keep going on this. We are not going to agree on what we think the definition of open is. So that then introduced the notion that, well, maybe it does go back to, I think it was Sheila that was talking about it, and a few other people have also mentioned it, that actually openness is actually a habitus, I feel like it's a practice or it's an attitude. And then when we actually pin down or try to pin down what the values of those might be to start with, that's again where we got into this situation. It becomes a contested space, but we did come up with some words. So we have courage, faith, agency, responsibility. The notion of we becomes actually quite important. These are all value terms. They are modified by this spectrum, if you like. But we did wonder whether that might be the more powerful question. It's not so much what's the boundary of the university in terms of its like physical proximity or it being a cell. Maybe the cell, to push the metaphor, is actually more of an ecology, and maybe it starts with the individual organisms within that ecology, not the individual cells. And if we start there, that might be the place where we might make more affective change and effective change at the same time. So this might be, I suppose, the response to provocation, maybe a starting point for potentially a pseudo or a part brief for what might be the bag of like values that we might consider open practice. I'm running out of words.
That'll do.
Okay.
That'll do. Game over.
Cool.